Right, it's 7:05, so I'll start, and we've got a couple of procedural items, things that get out of the way anyway, which give time for a couple of other people to arrive. So the standard stuff before the meeting starts, you know, the emergency evacuation procedure. In case of a fire, a bell will ring continuously, and please assemble by the War Memorial. Please don't use the lift and remain at the assembly point until told it's safe to return to the building. There are toilets on the landing by the stairs. Anyone attending the meeting is entitled to film it, but only councillors, officers and anyone around this table may be filmed. And please remember to use the microphone and switch it off when you finish speaking. And please put your phone on silent. Thank you. Right, so that's kind of preliminary stuff. Apologies for absence. Unfortunately, both Councillor Goldmans have had a family emergency to go and deal with, so they're not around. And yours isn't it?
I've also had apologies from Councillor Hyland.
Right, okay. Number 2, declarations of interest. As usual, if you have an interest in an item on the agenda, please declare it now or at the appropriate time. Item 3, the minutes of the meeting on the 12th of September. Can I sign those as a correct record? Thank you. And we note that one of the items was called in and will be at Scrutiny Committee next week. It's unfortunate, I think, that we couldn't have a meeting sooner, but there we go. Right. Moving on to item 4, we have public questions. Mr. Bentley.
No, is there a little bit? Yes, good. Okay, thank you, Chairman. At the last Cabinet meeting, I asked for some information about the play area in Campus Gardens, Southwood and Ferrers. My question was not answered, so I'd like to ask it again. How much extra land was incorporated into the Campus Gardens play area when it was remodelled? Since we established at the last meeting, the town had lost nearly 1,000 square metres of play area at Saltcoats Park. Having checked an aerial view somewhat soon after writing this, I noticed actually that there was not only no additional area, but actually there was less area on Campus Gardens than there was previously. Also, Councillor Moore used a document from 2012 to base the provision of play and other facilities at Chelmsford, Southwood and Ferrers Parks. Does the Councillor agree with me that it is time to come up with some new ideas for our parks? This is now the second Lib Dem administration since the Tories adopted this plan, and now Southwood and Ferrers and Chelmsford have both got adopted plans in place which aspire to greater things. Losing play space to general parkland is not really an upgrade. While I'm sure we will be pointed to future CIL money from the development north of the Burnham Road to fund new facilities, this won't arrive for some years. The developers haven't even begun work. Is it not right to use some of the district's capital budget to enhance our park facilities now? Currently, this administration has allocated less than 1% of the non-earmarked capital money to projects in Southwood and Ferrers, which has nearly 10% of the district's population. I would argue that a new toddlers play space adjacent to the play area in Campus Gardens is one project excuse me, the council should be moving forward on. There are others, and I would invite Councillor Moore and her officers to ask our residents what facilities they actually want, something I did at the start of this year. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you once again, Mr. Bentley, for coming from South Woodham to the Chamber this evening to ask you a question. At the risk of repeating myself, the answer is that the total area within Saltcoats Park Infant Play Area is 952 square metres, of which approximately 660 square metres was designated play space, but the remainder was close-mown grass margins. So whilst the perimeter and area of the existing play area in Campus Gardens remained the same, much of the area was grass, open space, and had sparsely placed equipment, as shown on the aerial photos that you mentioned. The infant or toddlers play area at Saltcoats was replaced by a neighbourhood play area, providing equipped play for all age ranges, and that includes infants 0 to 12-year-old children. And the policy to integrate and combine smaller, age-restrictive play areas into the larger, more inclusive neighbourhood schemes was first introduced in 2012 as part of the Equipped Play Development Plan. That plan is still active and in progress. We may have inherited a conservative document, but as Lib Dems, we do understand the value of integrated play and the potential of play areas to enhance young lives. And we are investing in areas such as this and also in provisions for older youngsters in our parks and green spaces. We are looking at grant funding opportunities. Indeed, we have invested in the skate park and lighting and Central Park CCTV at the request of residents. And we're also investigating options for the Make Space for Girls scheme, which is a remarkable initiative that brings to light some of the inequalities present in our parks. And I will definitely be pushing for more investment in those sorts of schemes alongside this long-term plan that we inherited. So I want to emphasise the true value of play space. You did mention aerial photos, and indeed the photos, which have a before and after, show that the vast majority of space in the toddlers, in the original play park, was just grass. So we have enhanced it considerably with a much safer surface in the new integrated play area. So the old play area refurbishment and replacement at Campus Gardens was subject to our normal consultation process because, again, you referenced the fact that we need to ask residents what they want. We invited local children and their parents and carers to contribute and involved local schools. Indeed, the town council was involved too, and through social media and on-site, through consultation we carried out with existing users of the play areas and visitors to the park. And the design was then chosen by majority vote. So on this occasion, 166 votes were cast, and there was a clear favourite, which was this plan by Wicksteed, and that was the design chosen. So I want to emphasise to people watching and listening that we do listen, and we are absolutely compelled to consult, because these spaces need to work for the residents who live and play in them. I want to provide reassurance to you, Mr. Bentley, and to residents that we do listen. The review also concluded that an additional neighbourhood facility should be considered to serve the southwest area of the town, and that's in accordance with the distribution and distance criteria. To date, however, no suitable site in terms of space or setting, including access, has been identified that is managed or maintained by City Council. And I acknowledge your view that further investment may be required in the future, but I'm sure you will also be aware of significant challenges we face as local authority, given the current financial position within local government. So to date, no suitable site in terms of space or setting, including access, has been able to be identified that is managed or maintained by us. However, as the review revealed, the southwest part of South Woodham should be given priority when it comes to future investment. Given that the Town Council is landowner and manages the land at Victoria Field and John Cox Playing Field, which are located in the southwest area, it may be that the Town Council wishes to consider such further investment in those locations in the future. I'm afraid that given the constraints of public question time, this forum really isn't ideal for our dialogue over the last 2 months, and I would welcome more questions from you outside of the forum we have this evening. But I'd also like to thank you very much again for making the journey from South Woodham, and I would like to reciprocate. So if you would be willing, I would welcome the opportunity to join with you and other town councillors in situ on site in South Woodham to discuss your plans and aspirations further. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you very much. We don't have any other public questions, so move on to questions from members who aren't members of the Cabinet. And just to remind you, this is questions on matters for which the Cabinet is responsible. Thank you very much to Councillor Jeeps, Massey and Whitehead for sending us questions in advance. So I'll go first to Councillor Jeeps.
Given the significant issues that the budget highlights in relation to housing, can you clarify where the City Council is in relation to the local plan 2013 to 2036 in the context of its strategic housing needs assessment? How many are required and how many have been built to date? Plus, going forward, has work been undertaken to look at the estimated need up to 2040? And if so, what are the numbers for this? Thank you.
Yep, thank you very much. Councillor Fuller.
Thank you for your question. The housing requirement of the current adopted plan from 2013 to 2036 is 805 new homes every year. So over that period, that will be 18,515 new homes. As of April 23, 6,825 new homes have been built. And we can see from existing planning permissions and site allocations in the current adopted plan that will deliver the remaining housing requirement up to 2036. Now, obviously, we've started to review the current local plan, and we use the government standard methodology in this instance. And when you do the calculations on that, that comes up with 1,000 new homes each year that we need to deliver. So that will be up to 2041. Now, we did look at this in the consultation document, the issues and options document, as we review the local plan, and that was presented to the Chelmsford Policy Board on the 14th of July. And that agreed that we would go with 1,000 new homes, but there is also a buffer on top of that as well. So we are looking at over 22,000 new homes in this period. And again, in the new local plan, we will make sure that site allocations are there to cover that number of houses or dwellings.
Thank you.
Okay, so I think the next question, Councillor Massey.
Thank you. Given the pressures on the leisure and heritage budget, can the administration advise the situation regarding the £275,000 investment in plant at the South Woodham Ferrers Pool and reassure my town's residents that there are no plans to close the pool?
Thank you for your question. In reply to that, the South Woodham Ferrers swimming pool was opened in 2005 and it's very well used both by the community and local schools. But as it's approaching 20 years old, we had anticipated that aspects of the building would start to need attention, and the sum of £275,000 was programmed within the capital programme to meet such anticipated costs. Any works of this scale require closure of the pool, which we are keen to avoid if we can. The centre of these works is the boiler and a series of pumps to heat the pool water. They are currently working satisfactorily, and we are currently reviewing the extent and timing of such replacements. This, of course, includes energy-efficient alternatives to fossil fuels, and this technology is developing. There is an opportunity within a few weeks to submit a bid to the Swimming Pool Support Fund, and we will be putting forward a bid for the South Woodham Ferrers swimming pool. Clearly, we would want to secure external funding when we can, especially if this will lead to a reduction in energy costs. So once we know the outcome in January, we can then decide how to plan to proceed and the full extent of any works to the pool.
If I could just follow, and so are there any plans to close the pool in the future?
No, there aren't.
Beyond maintenance?
No, there aren't. As I've just outlined, we are investing in the facility, we're maintaining it, we're improving it, and we're keeping it open.
Thank you.
Councillor Papa.
Thank you, Cabinet. I'm continuing to receive concerns on safety issues about the bus pickup points for Chelmsford County High School for Girls. This matter was first raised a year ago, but no resolution has been forthcoming. The current bus pickup and drop point is not considered safe for the children. Last week, we had a meeting at which the County Council highway experts and the school indicated that moving the bus pickup points to the car parks was the only safe option. But the City Council is still insisting that the bus pickup to be moved to Broomfield Road near Hyatt Place. This would involve many hundreds of more people trying to cross the roads towards the city centre, and the school is concerned that the City Council alternative will not be safe for their students, and that it would simply swap one safety concern for another. I understand there is need for more housing, and Council has plans to convert some car parks for housing. But I would like to, again, draw to the Council's attention that this is a matter of safety of children, as the high school does not have sufficient space to accommodate coach parking within its own campus. I would also point out that the current bus stops blocks the traffic during peak times, which then has a knock-on effect on the whole of Broomfield Road. And you can imagine why the residents are complaining about this on an ongoing basis. The County Council has said that they will pay for these changes to the car park and the charges to the car park and for the parking costs to keep our school kids safe. Today's children are tomorrow's future. So I would kindly request the City Council to reconsider the decision and allow this car park to be modified as to let coaches pick students during the designated hours. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Paffer. I'm happy to take that. Unfortunately, I couldn't make the meeting on Friday as I was otherwise engaged, and unfortunately, Mrs. Ford was unwilling to change the date of the meeting, otherwise I would have been happy to have been there. I know you're only a new council and so haven't been involved in the discussions which went on over the last sort of 4 or 5 years about what was called the Chelmsford City Growth Package, which led to the cycle path in place. As a local councillor, I made very strong representations that the county council was not installing it properly. And in that I was joined by the ward councillors, including Councillor Davison. And I still feel that the county council have not listened to the concerns, rightly, of residents about the way that cycle path has been implemented, in particular the way they've made the provision for the bus stops. And I've made that clear many times. One of the points which, unfortunately, the County Council seems unwilling to listen to is my suggestion and request over many years for the rephasing of the traffic lights at the bottom of the Broomfield Road. That is the thing that causes the biggest backing up of the traffic up Broomfield Road. The County Council refused to change the phasing of the traffic lights as a matter of policy because they want Broomfield Road to be congested to encourage people to use Chelmer Valley Road. That is their explicitly stated policy. If they were to relax that policy and change the phasing of the traffic lights, then there would be less queuing in Broomfield Road and there'd be less of a problem. So it is disappointing that the County Council have been unwilling to listen to the requests from residents and local ward councillors over the last few years. Specifically, the suggestion which you've just alluded to, which was discussed on Friday, about parking the buses outside Hyatt Place, that was suggested by the County Council as a possible previous solution when we last had a meeting a couple of years ago. So it was their suggestion, and it seems to me that that is a reasonable compromise for them to identify. Hundreds of children already walk up and down Broomfield Road between the station, the bus station, and the 2 grammar schools. And if a few more have to walk that way, I agree it's not ideal, but equally, if buses were turning in and out of Elms Drive, not only would that be unsatisfactory for the residents and, who live there, including some very vulnerable residents, but it would also be actually making the safety and the traffic problems in Broomfield Road worse whilst the buses were trying to turn out of Elms Drive, particularly whilst they're trying to turn right. So all in all, I am not happy, A, that I wasn't allowed or able to be at the meeting because Mrs. Ford wouldn't change the date of it, and I could have addressed these issues with you then on site in a much more satisfactory manner. I'm also extremely unhappy that the County High School was not willing to consider giving up some of their parking spaces at the front of the school. So there are alternatives, and fundamentally, this is a highways issue. The County Council is the Highways Authority, and fundamentally, it is their job to come up with a solution.
Thank you, Leader. But just a follow-up question on that. You said it's the County Council who has proposed this as a choice or an answer, but their first choice and the safest choice is the car park. If that option is not available, then this is the other option that they feel is ideal but not safe. I was part of that meeting, and I was there trying to park my car. Literally, there was no space in the front as well as at the back. And we all appreciate that the County High School is, and I know my friends who has moved from different parts of London, UK, just because to Chelmsford, just because of kegs, just because of CCHs, for the reputation they hold. And for me, it's not about which council is doing what. I'm just trying to put the children's safety first. I understand you just said that there have been children walking a few hundred meters here and there, but the cycle lane is one issue which has been addressed, which I'm on top of it as a ward and ward councillor. But the key thing over there now, what we're discussing there is actually the bus stop, which when the bus is stopping at that place, it doesn't matter whether they have a cycle lane or don't have a cycle lane, during the peak times, it's just clogging off more and more traffic. So my concern is just about the safety of these children, and I think...
Papa, could you actually ask a question, please? This is question time.
So I would request again the council to reconsider and help the students by giving the car park, allowing the car park for the buses to be picking up students from there, just purely based on the safety factor. Not an ideal, just purely based on the safety of the kids.
Okay, I'm sorry, that wasn't a new question. I think I've already answered that question comprehensively. Let's move on. Councillor Whitehead, you sent in a question. However, I disagree with you that it's nothing to do with the medium-term revenue strategy. I think it's absolutely to do with the MTRS, and so I will answer your questions after I've presented the MTRS.
Okay.
Are there any other questions?
Can I just apologise for the traffic situation outside?
No, I know. That's why we started late, to allow you time to arrive.
Oh, kind.
Yes. Councillor Thorpe, perhaps.
Thank you, Chair. It's approaching a year since the refurbished theatre reopened following some delays. Before the elections, we heard how the cost of that project had risen from an initial budget of 1 million to nearly 3.5 million. But the final cost remains unclear. So can we have clarity this evening on the final project cost, when that will be known? And also on the theatre, Appendix 4 at Agenda Item 7.1, there's a line, page 34, middle of that page, theatre income gains, but it shows no predicted income figures for the theatre in the future financial years. We've been told it was never part of the administration's business case for the refurbished project to increase income. Arguably, perhaps it should have been, because it's a significant asset. But why aren't there any income forecast figures for the theatre, at least for 24-25? And can you tell us when these figures will actually be available? Thank you.
Okay, so obviously I would have asked Councillor Goldman to answer this if she was here, so I will do my best and get her to follow up if there's any further questions. As we've said many times, in your opening remark, it wasn't an initial budget, it was an initial estimate. There was only ever one budget for the project, and that was the budget that we've delivered against. We haven't signed off the final account yet because the contractor is still doing some snagging. And then when we have done so, we will report back. As you know, a working group has been set up to look into this in some detail, and you and your group are welcome to make your comments. There is an income forecast. There's an income and expenditure budget for the theatre in this year's budget and next year's budget. Perhaps what you're saying is there isn't a forecast for a change, and that's true because at the moment, as you say, we've only been operating less than so 9 months. It's 9 months next week that the theatre's been open, and so once we've been operating for a full year, particularly once we've had the big boost, the annual big boost of the pantomime, which is the single biggest income item in the theatre's calendar, then we'll have a much clearer idea of what we can put into next year's budget. And of course, we're not actually setting next year's budget until January Cabinet and February Council. So if you want any more detail, I'm happy. I'm sure Councillor Goldman will follow that up with you. Okay. Any other questions? No. Okay. Thank you. So let's move on to the housing item, which is Councillor Foster on housing allocation policy.
Good evening, members. Here I am again with another amendment to the housing allocations policy. Anybody that was here yesterday will know that there is a serious housing crisis which is causing us considerable expense. So what I come here today is to seek approval for an amendment clarifying the Council's policy for the allocation of homes that have been provided in addition to the planned and existing housing stock to meet the needs of a specific group on the housing register. As shown, there are 3 possible options. What we're recommending is that we go with option 3, where the strategic housing manager has delegated authority to make allocations in exceptional circumstances. We think this is the clearest and cleanest way of doing it, and would be subject to sort of, least issues. We have applied, and the government is beginning to make available funding for various groups. And as we saw yesterday, we are eager and have applied for funding. However, if we weren't to change the housing allocation policy, we wouldn't be able to receive that funding, pass it to our partners, and then actually allocate the housing to the people who we've obtained funding for. So we need to alter the policy to avoid legal challenge, and obviously I'm sure everybody would want to do that because we don't want people spending time and our funding on legal challenges. There's no risk to the council because we would get, as we saw yesterday with housing benefit, we would get the money and then we would pass the money on, and we estimate if we do receive funding that we've applied for, that we might receive as much as £150,000. We would save that much by buying or renovating properties for this particular group. Because at present, the people that we would purchase these properties for are in temporary accommodation. All of the registered providers in our area have been consulted. All that responded said that they were in favour of this, and I would hope that everybody approves the alteration, the amendment. Sorry.
Any questions? Councillor Sullivan.
Thank you, Chairman. Yeah, it's a very simple point, just for clarification. You said everyone has been, registered providers have been consulted, which is good. I'm happy to hear that. But it doesn't say how many replied. It just says of those that replied. How many did you have replied?
I think about 3 replied. Yeah, 3 replied.
So out of how many? What's all?
About 15? Yeah, about a dozen.
Okay, so 25% replied. Okay,
yeah,
that was
about
all.
25%. I think they're the only ones that are, interested, really.
Okay.
Yeah.
That implies some are actually not based in Chelmsford, just...
Oh, yeah, well, yes. I mean, you have CHP, which is based in Chelmsford, and then there's the large ones like L&Q, etc., and all the rest, Sage, Places for People. So we would consult everybody that provides housing in this area, but some of them are huge national associations. And
okay, so it's a challenge for you to consult them. Okay, thank you very much. Thank you, Chairman.
Okay, no other questions? So is that proposal agreed? Thank you. So moving on to item 7. I was going to ask Councillor Golden to chair this item, so I didn't have to present and chair, but since she's not here, you're stuck with me. I shall try and control myself. As you know, this report is a position statement to summarise the overall budget position and have a forward look. And this is a 20-page report that goes into some considerable detail on many aspects, but could be summed up as things have never been this bad for all local councils. Now, of course, government may say, oh, we've heard this before, but there are some things that have not happened either ever or for a very long time. The two biggest problems that this report talks about are inflation across the economy and rising homelessness, neither of which we can control and which the actions of this government have made so much worse. For 28 years, inflation was at or below 3%, with the exception of just 2 quarters in 2009 and 2011. Then over 18 months from the last year and coming into this year, inflation has rapidly risen from 0.5% as we came out of the pandemic to 11%. 10 or 20 years ago, when our total costs were rising at 2 to 3% and income was rising by about 1.5 to 2%, councils could close that relatively small gap by fairly easy savings. But with inflation at 11% and our income still only rising by about 2 or 2.5%, we have a major problem for the second year. And of course, that comes on the back of 2 years of lost income due to COVID. So the homelessness budget has skyrocketed because of the number of Chelmsford families becoming homeless, and also the cost of housing each family has jumped too. So the cost of temporary accommodation for homeless Chelmsford families is forecast to overspend this year by £1.3 million. This and other in-year budget changes are reported on pages 9 to 12 of the report. But if current trends on homelessness continue to grow, costs will of course rise in future years, possibly by an additional 2.7 million in 2024-5 and by around 1.5 million each year thereafter. However, we live in hope that we'll soon have a government that actually cares about looking after the most vulnerable and starts to get a grip with this issue instead of ignoring it. On the numbers of homeless families, just a few years ago we had around 70, and now it's over 450. This is in part down to the national housing crisis, but also decisions here by previous administrations to not build enough affordable homes. As to the cost per homeless family, the private sector has been ramping up their charge to us, and the government doesn't cover all of that through housing benefit. In fact, they are funding a lower and lower share of the housing benefit bill. So the cost per homeless Chelmsford family, the cost to this council rises inexorably. The housing crisis causes the majority of the projected financial shortfall for later years. And without this cost, the financial position will be a much more familiar budget shortfall of around £1 million, which we would probably relatively easily close as we have done in the past. The main cause of the non-housing shortfalls is a consistent reduction in central funding for councils. If the government grant had risen in line with inflation since 2010, it would be nearly £12 million a year more than it is now. And you can see that in the chart on page 13. We've also very helpfully had more money taken away from us by the government that we were expecting next year. They were going to force commercial producers of packaging to pay us to recycle it, but now they're not. They've delayed that for at least a year, maybe longer, and that takes away £1 million that we were expecting next year. They've also delayed the raising of planning fees, which means that taxpayers continue to fund our planning department by about £1 million a year, money which should be covered by fees from developers. So the provisional forecast for next year is summarised in the chart on page 4 and set out in more detail on pages 17 and 18. The report goes on to set out the wider context in which we're operating. Chelmsford is not alone. all 350 councils around the country face similar challenges. Some of them, some of them in a much worse situation than Chelmsford. And some, as we know, are fast approaching financial failure. Those that have failed so far are mainly because they've taken rather risky investment decisions. They tried to invest in commercial assets using borrowed money to make up for the cuts in government grant. And their debt burden has become unsustainable with the rapidly rising interest rates. But in addition, those now approaching financial failure are predominantly those who are reporting social care budget problems and homelessness, as I've alluded to. Over the last 10 years, whichever party is in control of all councils, options for balancing budgets, finding cuts and efficiency savings to meet budget shortfalls, the options are running out. So we have a difficult financial forecast and we need to take a number of actions. These are summarised on pages 6 and 7 and are the recommendations that I'm asking Cabinet to approve shortly. We will, of course, present a balanced budget for 2024-25 in January, as we have done the last 4 years. We have always balanced the budget from a mix of reductions in spending and increased income, and we will do so to eliminate what the current forecast shortfall of £4.2 million. So the actions that we will be taking, we will be particularly taking a hard look at the costs of homelessness. We've set up a cross-department housing action group, which is chaired by Rob Hawes, which has been looking at a range of options and ideas to reduce costs in the housing team. And that working group will report to management team shortly and then to Cabinet. And we look forward to some imaginative ideas which are going to help with the finances. We are, of course, reviewing the capital programme as well, and the changes to that will be identified again in January for your discussion. We'll look at fees and charges, of course, which may need to rise more than we would like, but that is a reasonable response to the crisis that we face. And we'll, of course, live in hope that the government will see sense and will deliver us the fair funding settlement that they've promised for years but haven't actually delivered. I mean, this council, like every household in the country, faces huge costs dropped on us that we don't control, following decisions made by the government. But we will, of course, seek to minimise the impact on the public of any changes necessary to balance the budget, and we will continue to steer the council through this very difficult time, and we will remain focused on our ambition of creating a greener, fairer and more connected community in Chelmsford. So I move those recommendations in the report. Thank you. So, first of all, Councillor Whitehead.
Thank you very much, Chairman. Now, I sent you questions in advance, and to some extent you've covered those because it is a general one, but let me briefly read them out, or the first one out anyway, which covers what you've just said effectively. Given the worsening financial situation of councils throughout the UK, with many forecasting that services will have to be reduced or cut in the next financial year to meet budget shortfalls, what, in the opinion of the leader of the City Council, are the City Council services most likely to be at risk?
Okay, do you want them? You're going to do them one at a time, yeah. Okay. Well, I would say in answer to that question and question 2, that whilst the questions are relevant, they're not relevant yet, because the point of tonight's report is to set out the picture and then to look forward to, or project forward to the answers coming up later and certainly by January. So we will, of course, balance the budget as we always do, and there will be a mix of spending reductions, additional income and careful financial management so that we balance the budget. But we can't say exactly what those are going to be at this stage. And as I said, we live in hope that the government will tell us what the financial settlement is going to be in reasonable time. But they've already said that it's likely to be after Christmas rather than before Christmas. So helpful as ever.
Yes, good. Well, my second question, which you've sort of covered again, does the City Council administration foresee staff redundancies having to be made, or would large increases in charges to residents be a better option? I mean, all of these questions are not based on the budget, you'll appreciate. I mean, I pass them on as members' questions. Councillor Sullivan has a specific question maybe, but mine were on the general situation, really. As I say, I fully understand the difficulty this council has.
I'm going to be generous and let Councillor Sullivan ask questions as well, so that's fine. Look, obviously, we're going to do everything we can to protect services, and I have no intention of doing what you did in 2014 by deleting 26 posts and then underspending in the following year, suggesting that wasn't required. So, no to the first part of your second question. I don't foresee staff redundancies.
But you do possibly have, therefore, large increases in costs to residents? Well,
we took out 3 posts in this year's budget that were vacant, and we took out posts the previous year as well. So I stand by my answer. No, okay. I don't.
Thank you. Question 3 then was, clearly it would be preferable to increase income, but a number of major income areas are shown as TBC, which Councillor Thorpe perhaps has talked about. My particular one was about property matters, where car parks are earmarked for redevelopment, which covers Councillor Vetri as well. This would lead to a loss of income with no indication of the benefits of redevelopment or the costs of such redevelopment. Should these plans be reviewed?
So, as I think we mentioned at last meeting, we're already well advanced with our plans to build 58 homes for social rent, some of which are on car parks. We have one more planning application to go through the planning process. But as you also know, as we reported a number of times, since COVID, our car parks are a long way short of being full. And so when we take those car parks out of use for car parking and to build social rent homes on them, we don't foresee much, if any, reduction in car parking income because those cars can relocate to other car parks. For example, when we close Glebe Road, then some of the cars could relocate to Rectory Lane West, which is why it's not suitable for parking buses, because there'll be a lot more cars in Rectory Lane West, and we're also going to be building on Rectory Lane East. So all of those cars will relocate, and hopefully we'll still be generating income, the same income from car parking. And of course, by building those social rent homes, we're actually going to reduce our temporary accommodation costs.
So you, just to clarify, you said we are going to build it. Do you mean the City Council is going to pay for a development and build using its money?
Well, we are in discussions with partners about that, and we'll be able to report back. We need to complete the planning application process first so that we have a package ready to go.
Okay, thank you. And finally, the City Council still plans to use much of the capital built up by the previous administration to carry out major works at Waterside. Is this time to have an HS2 moment and cancel speculative capital expenditure, which has no short-term advantage and of which no details of longer-term revenue have been produced?
Well, I don't think you'll be surprised to learn I'm not going to take any lessons from this shambles of a government. And we intend to invest in our essential future infrastructure and build social rent houses, create a greener, fairer community. And this, I don't know what this government is up to. Our vision for Waterside is that it's a once-in-a-century opportunity to create a new sustainable neighbourhood that delivers a mix of housing, commercial and social uses. And unlike your administration, we aren't going to leave the building of affordable homes to the vagaries of the property market. We are going to build genuinely affordable homes ourselves, or by ourselves and or with partners. And as I've said many times, we will bring forward plans that you can examine for Waterside once we've evaluated the bids from potential joint venture partners.
Thank you.
Councillor Sullivan, I'm guessing, is next.
It's my turn. Thank you very much. I've got questions on Appendix 1, which is variations to the current year, I think. Note 1 talks about temporary accommodation, which is obviously the flavour of the month for today's meeting. I was somewhat alarmed to see that CHP repairs, we seem to be paying them £224,000, and we've made a bad debt provision of £265,000, which hopefully your working group may address. I wondered if you could put some more detail behind that.
Because I heard about half of that.
Right, I shall start again. Right, I'm referring to Appendix 1.
Yes.
Since temporary accommodation seems to be a flavour of this meeting, the question was around Note 1 on temporary accommodation. I was alarmed to see that the CHP repairs, we appear to be paying them £224,000, and we've made a bad debt provision of £265,000. You've told us tonight you have a working group. I wondered how that working group's going to tackle those things.
Well, that's the working group is sort of looking at slightly other things. Obviously, given the cost of living crisis and people not being able to afford to pay their bills, unfortunately, people are not being able to afford to pay their rent, and sometimes we have to make provision for that. I'm going to ask Phil Reeves or Paul Gales, our dynamic duo at the back there, who have all the answers.
Hopefully this is working. Yes, it's working. The bad debt provision is exactly that. There's a cost of living issue in terms of people being able to afford their the rent payments. On top of which, when we talk about housing benefit meeting rent, it does, but it doesn't meet the service charges. So when we put a tenant or a household in temporary accommodation, they will be getting housing benefit towards some of those costs, the rent. But if there's a service charge payable, they have to pay it themselves. Often these people it's very difficult for them to meet that cost. So therefore it falls on them, and therefore we find that we can't always collect all of it. So that's why we're seeing an uprise in bad debt provision. In terms of the repairs and maintenance, what it is we have an arrangement with CHP where they manage some of our housing stock and some of the properties that we rent off of landlords on a long-term basis. And as you turn over these properties, you have to get them repaired. Clearly, there's an issue in terms of the type of tenant we have, which leads to a higher level of repair. Additionally, though, the costs of repairs obviously are rising because of inflation. So I hope that answers your questions.
Yeah, so I think it says dilapidations fall to us to make good. Is that what you're saying?
That is part of the arrangement with the long-term leases. These are called private sector leases. What we tend to get, though, is a better deal from the landlord in terms of rent, and they're not rising as rapidly as you'd see in the rest of the market for rents. So we tend to pay a lower rent, but we often pick up more of a cost on the repairs.
Okay, thank you. My next question then is on Note 4, which talks about leisure and heritage casual staff, and we've had £320,000 overspend on casual staff. Again, I was somewhat alarmed. We've put effort into the theatre, yet we don't seem to have the people to run it. And can you give some more flavour behind that one?
Well, I mean, across the council, yes, we have to have a flexible approach to delivering services, and we need staff to deliver the services. Does anybody, Phil, going to help me again with that one?
Historically, for a number of years, we've actually overspent that budget, and that's been reported in previous cycles. Obviously, the cost of the staff has risen quite high, rapidly rather, because of the fact that these are usually at the lower end of the pay grade. So the overspend has grown, and one of the things that we'll be looking at in the next budget cycle is to adjust and to put the appropriate level of provision in. And again, it's to do with the fact that as the centres generate more income, you have to look at the number of courses you put on, the number of staff you put on. So it's getting those budgets aligned correctly. So effectively, there's an element of alignment, cost inflation, because these staff are low paid and they've been rising at 6 to 9%, these salaries every year. And getting that budget correct is what we're going to be doing as part of this next budget cycle.
Okay, thank you. I guess it does alarm me slightly because you'd hope the theatre at least washes its face financially. We're not subsidising it hugely, but I understand your answer, thank you. And my last point is on Note 9, which relates to the cemetery and crematorium. And again, we've had a £200,000 reduced income, and I just wondered if that's due to the increase in charges that this council has put into the cost of cremations and burials, and in fact, does that mean that we're no longer cost competitive? I know there are other crematorias all across Essex where people who are going for direct funerals are actually preferring rather than Chelmsford.
Well, we still are very competitive. We're still below the average. And it's a slightly delicate subject, but there are a lot of people that died in 2021 and not so many in 2022. Do you want to add anything, Phil?
On your point about it's the theatres, no, the casual staff actually are mostly in the leisure area. That's where most of that overspend is. And exactly that. What we've seen is an unexpected lower level of activity than we thought was possible at the Sem and Creme. Why that is, it could be post-pandemic. Just locally, that could be an issue. It's very difficult to know. Yeah, I've just been corrected. It's in line with national trends, that lower level.
Right, and then I was going to ask in on the budget gap, which is Appendix 4, but I think you've answered to Councillor Whitehead that TBC doesn't mean TBC, which I understand it means we haven't got an idea. It's you're working on it and you just haven't got anything to tell us yet. Is that correct?
Yes, I think that broadly it. So if you look at the chart, which appears twice, very helpful in the report, it appears at the top of page 4, and again when we go into further detail. So you can see that we've already identified likely additional fees and charges and income, which assumes a rise in council tax. So I'm looking at the coloured chart, which says revenue budget projection. If only it was protection. High level summary. So you can see in the yellow line that we've already identified additional income, and that's where the estimate for council tax and business rate extra income comes, which is why it's a minus sign. So we've already made some progress, and also lower down the other yellow line, there's extra income from business rate retention. Those of us who were here last night may understand a little bit more, but not all of it. Mr. Reeves was explaining how the business rate pool works, or rather doesn't work. So those are already items that have reduced the gap. But yes, as it says there, we've still got the 4.151 to find. As I said, I think the single biggest thing we can do is look at the costs of housing and homelessness, which the Housing Action Group will have proposals for us to look at soon.
Okay, thank you. I should look forward to seeing those. Thank you.
Councillor Steele as well. I'm being very generous. I don't think Councillor Whitehead will let you get away with this if he was chairing.
If I may, I'd like to follow up one of Councillor Sullivan's questions about the leisure staff. It talks about casual staff. What's the definition of casual staff? Why do we need casual staff? I assume it means contract staff. And it talks about vacancies, and it talks about illness. I think I was just wondering whether we've got a high rate of sickness, and what are the activities that have increased, and are they bringing extra income in?
I think, as Mr. Reeves just said, it's an essential part of delivering flexible services that as we increase the number of, we're really pleased that we've been able to increase the number of services and facilities that we offer at the leisure centre, but you have to kind of then add temporary staff. It's principally, casual staff is mostly within our leisure facilities, of which we have 4, of course, and as demand goes up, then we have to staff it up, but we don't know in advance necessarily exactly what those staffing will, so we need to, casual staff is an essential part of balancing that budget. So Mr. Nicholson, I think.
Yeah, so I just caution you against looking at this figure in isolation, because obviously we use agency or casual staff for circumstances where people are unexpectedly off for whatever reason. We also use casual or agency staff to cover planned periods of holiday, rather than having more staff to cover that. And I think you have to look at this figure in the context of what the costs of the, if you like, regular staff are, because often we have an increase in the casual staff, but it's partly offset by a reduction in the regular staff, the permanent staff. And I think you also have to look at, as you've alluded to, sometimes we use in the leisure centres in particular, casual staff are employed to put on extra activities, extra programmes, for which there is a income, which also offsets it. So I think it's really difficult, and I sympathise with Mr. Reeve in terms of trying to present this at this level in the budget. You've got to look at the next level down to see what that really means in practice, and how it relates to other expenditure in other parts of the account and the income. I think the other thing which is playing on the leisure centre side, the casual staff, is that we're just beginning to sort out the employment relationship with some of these casual staff, because the employment regulations now mean that we can't treat casual staff in quite the same way in all circumstances. So there's a gradual movement to regularise their employment terms and conditions in accordance with the current employment law. So you throw all of that together, it's a very, very complicated picture to explain, which we can do in detail probably at a later point. But the high level, what you're seeing here is a high level, it talks about an overspend on casual staff, because we're spending more on that line on the budget than we had in the budget. Doesn't necessarily mean it's quite as disastrous as I think you're thinking it is at the moment.
Okay, any other questions? You wouldn't let others get away with this, would you? Would you?
The problem is that because the budget covers different areas,
yes,
as was
I
mentioned,
understand.
if you only have one person, Mr. Sullivan, asking you 15 questions.
Yeah, I know. That's why I'm very happy to let Councillor Jeeps ask some more questions.
Well, first, before I ask a question, I'd like to take a little bit of issue with some of the statements you've made that have been very political, which is we are actually, all of us, living in a particularly difficult time. We've gone through a pandemic, and we're now suffering the effects of the Ukraine war. And of course, recently in the paper, we see Israel and Palestine at war. These are not things that the government has created. They're things that have had to be dealt with by all of us, not a Conservative conspiracy to undermine your budget, which I think when you make political gain out of that is disappointing. So I'll go to my question now. It is about the balance of obviously the charges that you talk about having to increase and how much you increase charges so that people then find they can't afford the services that you're providing, or the leisure services. I'll take example of this is that it was really pleasing to see that the tennis courts at Oaklands have been refurbished. Unfortunately, members of the public are now saying they can't afford the prices that are being charged to actually use the new tennis courts. Now, I think some of that funding, I don't know how much of the proportion was, but there was a grant for those. And I just wonder how the balancing of increasing charges is actually being mated with people's lack of money in their purse and how much they can afford. It's great to have the leisure facilities, but if they can't afford them, then they're not going to be able to use them.
Well, of course, you're right on that point, but it was a very difficult decision. That we did discuss this at length internally, but the grant was only available from the Lawn Tennis Association if we implemented a charge. So because they want to take it on and manage it through the booking system that is mentioned in the City Life article, so that was a difficult decision. But there are plenty of other tennis courts that are still freely available, like at Melbourne Park and other places. So yes, on your opening remark, well, yes, there are lots of external factors, but just over a year ago, we had a moment of madness with a Prime Minister who didn't last very long and had to go because of the crazy budget which she and her Chancellor pushed through. But anyway, I'm going to ask Councillor Moore to add a bit more on the tennis issue.
Thank you, Chair. So the LTA are obviously very keen on encouraging more people to play at grassroots level. And in order that we can support other people and newcomers to the game as well, the schemes in place will involve a certain level of workshops and training alongside improvements, such as we've seen at Oaklands. It was a while ago, it was last year, Mr. Nicholson, when it came to Cabinet. So can you remind me about the situation as regards input from the LTA? Do we have support from them for the grassroots scheme? We
do, but just to remind about the the basis of that investment. So the investment from the Lawn Tennis Association paid for putting those courts, back into use, so they were out of use. As part and parcel of that grant support, they had a condition, as Councillor Robinson said, that they needed to be charged for. There was then some discussion about the charging basis and what was an appropriate level was, so that it was sustainable. And then obviously they are supporting some grassroots activity that Councillor Moore's referring to promote tennis, which is what the LTA are trying to do, is promote grassroots tennis. So basically, if we didn't enter into that arrangement, which is, it's pretty fair and finely balanced, you wouldn't have any tennis courts, at Oaklands, because there wouldn't have been any money, to put them into the current position. So, I mean, you have to, in this time where the council doesn't have sufficient resources, to spend on, upgrading and, putting, assets back into use, you have to use the systems and the programs that are available. And that happens to be the focus of the LTA one. And it shows from the LTA a pretty strong commitment to try and help develop grassroots tennis in Chelmsford, but it's a wider national programme. So that's what you're seeing in play there. And I mean, as Councillor Robinson said, we have made sure that there's adequate provision, and free access to tennis courts across the council's, suite, which includes Melbourne, it includes Lionmead and such like. And there are other multi-use courts that can be used for tennis. So in the context of things, having a chargeable facility, high level facility at Oaklands works fine in that mix of tennis provision across the borough. And I think that's where you have to look at the provision as a whole rather than a single example of that particular facility.
Okay. Any more questions?
Is it true to say that the budget has only been balanced by the fact that you've got healthy reserves, and going forward you're going to need those?
Well, it's true that we've used reserves and reductions in spending and increases in income to balance the budget this year and last year, but as did Councillor Whitehead in previous years. Yes, following the HMRC action that we took on the VAT refund, we have got some money in reserves. It's just as well, because as I mentioned in my report, we had 2 years of lost income during COVID. We still had to spend the money, but we weren't getting the income. And so it's just as well that we have reserves. And then when energy prices more than doubled in a year, we needed the reserves to cover the energy price shock as well. So it's just as well that we have.
I mean, it's just that I noted your criticism of the previous regime who actually built those reserves. That's why I made that point. But thank you.
My criticism was different to the one you've suggested. Any other questions? No? Okay, so are the recommendations on item 7 agreed? Okay, well, I think that brings the agenda to a close. Thank you for your attendance. Could I just say, managing the meeting, Councillor Papper, as I said when opening the meeting, you're perfectly at liberty to film the meeting, but it might be less disruptive if you did it from your seat rather than wandering around during the meeting. Thank you. I'm just asking how to, just to make